Hola, hola, y bienvenidos a Tu Salud, the definitive podcast for Latine and Indigenous health policy, where we talk about all things Latine, policy, and our health. I am Dr. Ceci Aquino, Executive Director at the Latino Coalition for a Healthy California. And today, I am joined by the amazing Angelica Salas, Executive Director at CHIRLA. Today, we'll be talking about the beautiful balance of joy and struggle in the immigrant experience, the importance of owning our power, and immigration as a key social determinant of health. And with that, let's get started. Let me give you a warm welcome to A Tu Salud. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to be having this conversation with you.
Pleasure to be here. And I'm just really excited to just also have a conversation. And just really want to say how much I appreciate the work you do and the organization um, does for our community. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. And I feel so close to you and the amazing work that you all do because you all and your work and your leadership has personally impacted me. I grew up undocumented. I am now a documented individual and professional. And it's because of your advocacy and the amazing leadership that I get to be here today. So, this is a personal thank you for all the amazing work that you do for our gente.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. And this is why we fight, because we know that there's so much brilliance in our community and it can be demonstrated in this way. Thank you.
Of course. So, with that, maybe let's start there with the personal story. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. What did you go through as a child? Your stories that formed who you are today.
Sure. So I was born in Durango, Mexico. And I was born in La Sierra de Durango, and that has a lot of significance to me. So La Sierra de Durango in Canelas. Durango is basically a very isolated region in our northern, the northern state of Durango. And so I grew up with my grandmother because my mom had actually come to the United States. So I came with my sister and I actually stayed with my grandmother in Durango. And so Durango and where I was born, it's trees, it's beautiful. It's just this I would almost call it idyllic, right? In the sense that it's forest, one of the it's in the heart of the Sierra Madres. So I grew up with rivers and trees, and so nature is very important to me. But my dad came to the United States after my sister and I were born. My mom followed him, and to be reunited with him, but also to provide for us. We stayed with my grandmother and an aunt who was taking care of us. But the aunt was a teenager, but she was the one who took care of us until my parents had enough money and the ability to call for us and to be able to bring us to the United States. Both my parents came to the United States undocumented, and so they both, didn't have any paper. So we, of course, to be reunited with them, had to cross that border. And so that experience for me, I was a child. I was probably 4, going on 5. I was little. I was a little kid, and so it just really has had a very like a very something that I still remember and feel, and even sometimes when we cross the border, I still have this, like, something in my body just kinda shifts and changes. So we came, my sister and I came with an uncle who was at the time 16 and my aunt who was 14, who I consider one of my second moms. And so we came to the United States, because, my parents wanted us to be reunited, and I always say I'm so thankful for that decision. When we arrived to Pasadena, California, which is still my home, I was greeted by my mom and my dad and my new little brother, who had been born in the United States. And I could remember my mom very well. Like I remembered, and I say, "No, this is my mom," and I remembered my dad a little bit less, but I definitely knew these were my parents. But my younger sister was like, "Who in the world are these people? Why are we without our our grandmother. And during the journey, we were actually separated from our aunt, who we knew, and so it was very traumatizing, especially for my sister, because not only were we away from my grandmother, but we were also away from my aunt who had journeyed with us. She eventually joined us in the United States as well, soon after, but it was just that moment of like, who are we? Why are we here? And I remember telling my sister and reinforcing, no, these are our parents. This is who we are. So, so we grew up in an undocumented family with a brother who had been born in the United States. Um, and I came, and so I was growing up, and because we were undocumented, growing up in the 70s, then there was a lot of like raids in factories and raids on buses and just lots of different things that would happen to undocumented families. And so, one of the things that happened to my family that I know had a really huge impact on me was that when my mom was a seamstress and my dad just worked different jobs, ended up working mostly construction his entire life, but early on he had just different jobs. And I remember very much my mom, though, had mostly worked as a garment worker her entire life, and only towards the end of her life was she a janitor. But basically, sewing was how she made a living. And so what ended up happening was that her factory was raided, and in that factory worked my uncle, my mom. As more people arrived to the United States from our rancho, they also worked in these factories, and so everybody who worked in that factory was deported, including my mom. And so it was just a very scary moment. I'm the oldest now of four. At that time, I'm the oldest of three, and it was for me. It was just this moment where my dad's like, "Your mom's been picked up, your aunt and your uncle, everybody. The factory was raided," and I just remember how scared he was and how scared I was, and just what it meant for our family. So that was something that we just experienced. My mom came back. I also remember her arriving to the house in the back of a trunk of a car, and so to me, I was like, "What?" As a child, you just don't understand a lot of these things. I just understood that something really bad had happened and that the migra suddenly appeared and took our folks away. But then, my dad, in his foresight, started looking for help. And so he started going to as when my mom came back, she's like, "No nos puede pasar esto otra vez. This can't happen to us again." So he started looking for help, and he ended up going to. I later found out the International Institute, an organization that worked with immigrant rights. The International Institute, by the way, is a founding member of CHIRLA, one of the founders of the organization that I now work for. But my dad went to ask for support and help. And that's where they told him that because my brother had been in the United States, and mind you, this is before IRCA and right before IRCA. But they said, I think you probably qualify under this class action lawsuit that allows you because your son was born, I think, before 1976, and there was a particular like grandfathering in. I found this later, after later, all I knew was we were eventually able to legalize our status because my brother had been born in the United States. And for his protection, we could legalize our status. And so we finally got our papers early in the 80s to be legalized in this country. And at that point, we we I remember, like, our life changing. Like, my dad was able to go back to Mexico, my mom was too. We finally got to see my grandmother, and so it was just beautiful. And so kind of the other going back to, like, the original question, which I is, like, why do I do this? Well, I know how it feels to have not have documentation and then to have it. And so I also remember, because the rest of my family kept arriving to our home, and our home was the place where we welcomed our uncles and our cousins and our and aunts and just families and friends who would arrive, and they would often stay in my home. And my dad and my mom were very welcoming people, and they would make room for anybody who ever arrived. And so I just quite in the stories I heard in the background about what was happening, how the journey went when they crossed the border. Many times they were hurt, so my mom would take care of them. Sometimes they arrived very hungry, so it was just a lot of things. Again, at that time as a child, you don't quite understand what was happening. So then in terms of our life, continued. But then amnesty happened in 1986. And I'm 15 years old, and my family, all the people who were undocumented around me, suddenly got a chance to apply for amnesty. And it changed their lives. My aunt, people who were working in the garment factories, my uncles and aunts were working in farm work. They would, and I was like the oldest. I was a good student. I knew how to type. So I had family that would come from all over California to come so I could help them type up, right? Not computers, no nothing, type up and help them type up their application. And it was just, they're like, oh, me dijo tu papá que nos puedes ayudar a escribir la aplicación. And so it was just, it was family. And this is what you do for family. But I just saw how it was the application itself and all that it went with it. And then the other part about it was also once they started getting their cards, and how that like was just so incredible. And they would come and tell me llegó, and they were so happy. So that is what motivates me. It's that like it motivates me so much because um, I know, sorry, I know so many people deserve to feel like that. They deserve to feel like that. They deserve to feel like something heavy has been lifted off of them. And it's also a very joyous moment. It's not, and maybe I'm just remembering, but anyway, but that is what happened. And so the other part of this is that I also remember hearing, because this is when CHIRLA was founded. So CHIRLA was on Univision and Telemundo, and I was a 15-year-old helping my family. And I was like, oh, esa organización que está ayudando a los inmigrantes, and they would come on. And that was the first time I think I heard about CHIRLA. So fast forward, my mom's like, she's a garment worker. I learned how to work. She showed me how to sew. I sewed with her. But, she said, either you want to do this job for the rest of your life or you actually really focus on your education. And that's what I did. I really focused on my education. I really believe in the idea that if I pursued an education, that therefore I would have a better opportunity. And if I had a better opportunity, that my life would be better and I wouldn't have to be sewing with my mom. And even though I'm very thankful, I have to just say, I always say, I am so thankful for my mom that she showed me how to sew because I've done so many things and, you know, that's very fun and lots of little things over the years with my children and things like that over the years. And so, anyway, the thing that I just wanted to say was that that's when I first heard about Chirla. So, and continued on into my work. I graduated from high school. I went on to college. I went to Occidental College. I went to Occidental College at the height of sort of the 90s and a lot of activism. So I was very involved in Mecha. But then the second time I heard about Chirla was during the uprisings in 1992, because Chirla was actually once again in the news and it was supporting a lot of the people who were part of the 1992 um, unrest. And so a lot of undocumented folks have been being arrested. So that's the second time I've heard of it. And then there's some volunteer opportunities, and got to just know a little bit more about the organization. I graduated from college. I go to the East Coast. I was supposed to do a master's in international relations, but I was a kid who didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have money, and so I had to work. And I said, okay, I'm going to work because my parents don't have the money to help me pay for this master's program. They barely had any money for my last year of college, and it was really hard. And so I said, no, mejor, me pongo a trabajar. I'll work. I'll raise the money, and I did. And then I was going to go back because I asked for a deferment. But in between, I had this time that I could have and do anything I wanted to do. So I came to volunteer for CHIRLA. And this is when in 1994, Prop 187 had passed. And a lot of the people, so much horrible stuff was happening here in California. And I started to volunteer at CHIRLA. There was an immigrant assistance hotline. They asked me to support around some of the administrative work. I was supposed to go back to school in September. I was here in April. And instead of going to school, I ended up taking what I thought was going to be a 1 year job. And I said, oh, I still have 1 more year that I can use in my deferment so I could um, go back to school. But that 1 year turned into quite a lifetime. But I've also seen California change, and I've seen it. I've been part of that change, and I've seen lots of things happen, and I've seen um, maybe not the systemic way we wanted to, but even individually, we've seen people go from that certain afraid um, about their lives, even though they're rooted and they have family, but then suddenly be able to have a different kind of life, and that's something that's very powerful. So that's why I do the work I do. I love it. I do it because I'm always inspired by so many people who do this work in at CHIRLA, our members, our staff, many who themselves were members first and came up and I maybe have known since they were very young. But I just wanted to say that, for me, it's still it's very much a joy, even as it is part of a struggle to get to advance the work.
That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. I feel like that story gave me chills. Just the whole completing that picture, right? Something that you heard about while you were growing up, you volunteered, and now you're leading. So it's just so powerful to hear that story. And I think something that really resonated with me was the experience that you mentioned even now when you cross the border, right? That physical um response that you get. And I think many times for our immigrant communities, we forget the deep impact that it has on our physical, on our mental health, and the way that we see and experience the world on a day-to-day basis. And other folks who are not immigrants don't have that, like you said, this balance of joy and burden, right? To really experience the world with that frame.
Definitely, and I often I think about that a lot when I see a lot of the little children who we interface with as we do a lot of, for example, a lot of our work right now with recent arrivals. But every over the years, I've met a lot of kids. I learned about their stories through their parents often. Sometimes they will share it, and sometimes it's like not even talked about that journey, what happened in that journey. You're asked to forget about it. Um, Sometimes very bad things happen in that journey towards coming to the United States, especially if you did not arrive in what I call, a train or an automobile or a plane. You arrived in, because you walked to the border, because you journeyed many miles, and so many times you had to cross in the middle of the night, and so there's still experience, but there's nothing that we have to have children talk about that. It's almost like out of sight, out of mind, forget about that. Now here in the United States, but I think that's why it's so important that we really take seriously um, the mental health of our kids, not just their physical health, and that we also recognize that happened to them. We need to support them beyond now. Just now you're here. It's like a fresh new start. Everything before it erase and now move forward. But it's still with you.
Exactly. Yeah, it stays with us. And with that in mind, I'm just curious, as a Latina, very much having faced and experienced this immigration system at a personal level, are there any times that stick out to you? Maybe as you were going through high school, college, the journey that came after, that just segment or made this work that you're doing now a reality, right? It became a career path that you could pursue as a Latina, and maybe at that time there weren't as many Latinas in the positions of formal power that we're seeing now.
So, what's interesting for me is that, first of all, like I said, I came to it as a volunteer. And my colleague and my friend who actually was who told me about the opportunity I went to college with, and she was moving on to now she's a professor. She's a professor doing this work. At that time, she was um, uh, doing the job that I eventually did with was to be an administrator for the organization, right? And we were a very small organization. But what solidified for me, like this was where I wanted to do. Um, I really do believe it was Prop 187, and I was doing the hotline, and I heard a lot of calls and talked to a lot of people who are using our hotline to talk about all the horrible discrimination that was happening to them. And many of the individuals, not only they were some of them were green card holders, but a lot of them were U.S. citizens. And that's when I really connected this whole thing about anti-immigrant, which I really think is anti-Mexican and anti-Latino, into like, no, this is a something that we have to fight against. It was so damaging to the people who are being impacted by it. And I did to make a decision. I think it was one of the best decisions of my life, which was there was a moment in time that I had to say, will I go forward and continue my education or will I stay here? And sort of and also I just a lot of the people that we worked with, they looked like my mom and my dad. They just there was something about that that felt very much personal. But I started, like I said, first a volunteer, then I was hired on as an administrator, and then when the year passed, that's when I knew I was going to stay. And I made that decision because I really felt like, oh, I could always go back, but right now I felt like I could do something about what was happening now, right? And I could educate that education could hold. I could wait for that. And and so then I was doing my work. We were doing at that time the organization was working with day laborers and opening up the first day labor centers in the country, doing some of the first, some incredible work with um, domestic workers. And then also we made a decision that we were going to work with immigrant youth, right? No, and I remember as an organization saying, no movement has ever advanced without organizing and without the and has never advanced without the power of young people. And so we have to really engage young people, immigrant youth, into our movement. But that's where I was, right? And so then my executive director, my boss, decided to move on, and um, there was a search for the executive director for CHIRLA, but they needed an interim director because I was good at the administration and I was called some of the finances, some of the administering. That was my job, administrator. They told me to if I would be willing to do the work. As They promoted me to associate director, but they asked me if I wanted to do it as an interim role, and I said yes. And so the hiring process took a very long time, like almost 9 months and then they had offered it to a particular person. The person said no, so it was just going to extend. That's when I just said, well, all the people that have been interviewing, I don't think any of them are immigrants, and I'm an immigrant. I think I can do this job because I've been doing it for 9 months. I know this work, and I think there's a little bit of naivety in me too, like a little bit of, as a young person, I can do this. And I was, at that time, 28 years old, and so I said, so I'm going to apply. I'm going to put my hat in, and I don't. I think I surprised the board, and I surprised even my own colleagues. But I thought, but I'm an immigrant. I remember just thinking that everybody who was interviewing was not or at least the ones that I knew were not. And so that's when I said, I want to let me step into this. And I was one of the youngest, and I was one of the first immigrant executive directors, and it was just myself in LA. And then there was an executive director who was Salvadoran, a man who was Salvadoran in Northern California, and a woman in Chicago who was from Guatemala, an immigrant Guatemalteca and but everybody else was actually either they were white or not, and not Latino. So I just think that sometimes there's moments where I think about where the universe puts you, and I also think that sometimes it's where you put yourself. And at that moment, I just felt like, well, I should try. and I think I can do a good job. And that's how I went from being an interim director, and I was given the position in 2000 to be the executive director. So that's how I ended up in this position. And that I always say that 1 year has certainly been many more years, and I'll be now my 29th year at CHIRLA.
That's amazing. And I'm so glad and thankful that you did. And I think it takes many times it takes that owning our power moment, right? What led us to say, I can do this, and having that confidence in ourselves. And obviously, you've been killing it and you're doing an amazing job. So,
Well, I always have to say, sometimes you do it, you get it right, and sometimes you make mistakes. So I also feel like it's important for us to sometimes those mistakes you make, and sometimes the things that you quite don't get right are the things that actually um, really support you, in the sense that they really support you in that because you learn there's something about sometimes not getting it right the first time that allows you to do it better the second or the third time. So it's
yes,
good.
I couldn't agree more. Keeping that growth mindset, right? Learning
Mhm.
as we go, and we never stop learning, right? Until, yeah, I love.
Yeah. I was at a meeting yesterday and I said, "Oh my God, I love this. I learned so much." And that's what I feel, that, and that so many people have so many people who surround you have so much to share and so much to teach you, and then to also be open to teach others.
Yes, and actually that stood out to me during our panel conversation with Secretary Becerra. Just the beautiful wisdom that the youth at the table brought, right? And the way that they're utilizing the communication networks with TikTok to share their stories and to amplify the
Right.
movement.
Yeah, I think both of us were inspired on that day, but I'm also very inspired by you. I really want to tell you, I think it's so beautiful to see you in this leadership role, and I'm inspired by the fact, that there's so many Latino women who are also saying, no, I have a lot to contribute. I can, even as we have a very much a learner's mindset and want to and curiosity, constant curiosity. I also think that there's like a lot we already know that we can share. So I'm really excited about your own leadership, and as equally excited as I was about the young men who were sharing their stories, whether as researchers and academics or as aspiring doctors in this field, obviously with the different statuses equally. I was just so happy and excited that you're in your position and representing our community and advocating for the access that we deserve.
Oh, thank you so much. You have no idea. That means the world to me. You're making me tear up over here. It means the world to hear that from you.
I really mean it.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, well, in thinking about our immigration system, right, and managing and balancing the federal level work with the state level work, how do you hit that balance in a way that is sustainable?
Well, the first thing is that we have to understand that I always say, act from what you can control the most first, right? And also to understand that when we're all our work is local. We're working with people at a very local level, especially as an organization that does provide direct services, community education and outreach, legal services, humanitarian support. So you're working at a very local level. And what that does is it really gives you an understanding of how um, policies or the lack of those policies actually how they impact people. And it gives you a vantage point. And if you do the organizing too, not just the delivery of service, but you organize your community, you get to actually really understand what they see as solutions, what they see as things that could happen to change their life for the better. So I feel a lot of the advocacy and why is it that we then say, okay, we're going to advocate at the local, at a state, and the federal level. How do you balance it? Well, it comes from really the what it is that people need, right? So at one point, um, and, and especially with our immigrant youth, they couldn't get into college because it was too expensive because of in-state. because they weren't considered residents for purposes of tuition. So then you figure out, well, who can change that? And where can that be changed? And then you're like, oh, okay, that's state policy. So therefore, we have to, it's a, again, we're seeing it at the local level, but we can change it at the state. And this is how we can actually engage because that's in that jurisdiction or a driver's license. Who controls who gets a driver's license in this country? Well, the state DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. So how does that happen? Um, what's that role? And then you discover, well, actually, you have to change law in order for the Department of Motor Vehicles to actually issue licenses. You start learning about history, about why they have it, they used to have it and not, and now don't. And so then that fight. Same thing with healthcare access. And so where do you have control? And sometimes, like, when it comes to healthcare, it's controlled at every level. So there's things you can control about access to healthcare at the very local level, in your local clinic, in your local, even in your own, even in, I would say, even in your own school, in terms of the help, the nurse, it's like very local. But then, what's happening at the county level? What's happening what can the state do? And then within at the national level, what can you do? And so always, because you're always driven by the solutions that are needed for your community, and then you really figure out where within government, who has the jurisdiction to change that. So right now, today, we got a major announcement that we have been suing the Department of Homeland years around these coercive tactics that they have in order to arrest our people, sometimes pretending to be people who they are not, especially local law enforcement, and then completely, using that to enter their homes without permission and just to really violate their rights. And so today, after many years of fighting this, we got an announcement that actually that we're correct, and we want it's a major ruling that basically says no. These home arrests and the manner in which they're doing is wrong. You're violating the rights of people. Well, we knew that that was happening, but where could we actually intervene? And so we could intervene in the courts, and so we could actually sue and it was immigrant rights organizations and the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and the Pomona Day Labor Center, others who were seeing the same thing happen. And so and now we have a decision that our hope is it will impact not just in California, but around the country. And then it comes to federal law. The reality is that the only ones that can issue and change the reality for millions of undocumented people is in Congress. It's Congress, and so if you wanna fight for legal status for people who are currently in this country undocumented, so that they can have that relief and that opportunity that I experienced with many of my family members in, in the '80s, then for me, it's also about, well, we have to fight at that level. And so sometimes it's about, the needs of around education. It's sometimes there are issues about consumer protection. There your community is telling you what's happening and what is it that the relief is that they need and what is the solution that they identify. And with them, you figure out, well, who are the decision makers that can actually change this for the better, and how do we convince them to act on our behalf. And so that's what I would say would be the balance, right? And also I think in an organization is balancing that the fact that you have people, and over the years we've grown our policy and advocacy, we've grown our organizing so that we could be at different levels of these what I call jurisdictional interventions so that we can actually advance the things that our community needs.
That's powerful. And I think your focus on community. I think CHIRLA does such a beautiful job of centering community members, our stories, and our voices, right? I think one of the most beautiful experiences for me is seeing CHIRLA members at the Capitol exercising that right of speaking up and talking about their experiences.
And I often think that it's very important for us as leaders, and we say leaders, leaders of community-based organizations, folks who are doing this, like we have a voice and we exercise that and responsibility to speak up on behalf of our community. But our true job is to advocate with them, to like wherever possible that they because that they have an opportunity to speak on their own behalf, right? And that we create those spaces. So it's not to negate like the interventions that we individually have to have, and that our responsibilities and our roles have, but that is to create a broader open space for and platform for our folks to have their issues and their solutions spotlighted. So that's the other part. And that's where I want to just say makes my job so much easier because it's in doing that. And I learn a lot from them too, because I learn a lot about what's going to make sense in their lives and what's happening. But I also learn a lot about courage through them. Right? I see them and dedication and commitment. You know, they're volunteers. They're coming up. They're sometimes they're asking for a day off to come up to advocate with us. They're taking that hit because they're like, no, this matters so much for me, and it's just beautiful to see. And so that kind of actually is it's just very inspiring, and you learn so much about how to be a better um, advocate, how to be a better leader through them. Because you're just better at your job because you do it with.
Yes, I couldn't say it better. And in that courage journey, really, it's an election year. It is an interesting balance for our communities, right? Having gone through a Trump presidency, the deeply hurtful narrative that came through because of that period, and the way that our communities continue to face things like the chilling effect and disenrollment from the safety net programs that they deserve because of that fear around the narrative that's expressed at the national level. How do we support our communities in this election year? And much of that narrative is already coming our way.
I think that one of the things that creates a lot of disempowerment is feeling you can't do anything about it. Like it's almost like if you see an avalanche coming, but you could do nothing about it, and it's just going to come. And I think that we have also a responsibility to engage people in actions and activities that actually are going to try to stop whatever it is that they're fearful about. And so that's why Shirla is very involved in civic engagement, but also in, all year organizing our community to have a say. Because when people see their own power to change things, and maybe they, you know, it's not going to happen right away, but there is a level of okay, at least I am doing something to combat the negative, the possible negative outcome. So in my local community, what can I do in order to ensure that those who are elected are actually responsive and respectful of who we are as a people? That they're going to relate to us and create relationship with us in a way that can actually build on not just on immigration policies, but on a whole host of other things, right? And so I think the thing that we have to do, and this is also for and with anything, with for our mental health, because mental health impacts our physical health, is to ensure that we are activated and that we're really looking at to create activity and action that seeks to advance our work forward. But that we're doing it not for people, but with people. And suddenly it's like you're part of the fight and you become more engaged in it. And suddenly yes, a huge storm might be coming, but you're preparing for it. You're doing something to protect yourself. And I believe that our future is in our hands. It's about putting pressure on those who could do more to do so It's about holding accountable those who committed to do and advance and respect our rights to do so. And then it's about just advancing together. So that's what I feel. I think that, and that's why isolation around men, when people are isolated and disconnected, it also has a huge impact on their health and well-being. And so organizing and connecting people with each other, people who have similar experiences with going through the same things, you create spaces of solidarity. You create. I see a lot of our members, and they hold each other, they take care of each other, they listen to each other, they don't judge each other in terms of the situation that's happening to them because of their immigration status, but they feel free to discuss these things, and it's in the context of organizing, and then suddenly they don't see themselves as isolated in their problems or their issues. Suddenly they're like, oh, te está pasando a ti también, a mí también. And then when you offer, like, let's talk about what we could do together. That's how our cash assistance program for immigrants came to be, as a one of the issues that are advancing at the state level, which would allow undocumented seniors and disabled seniors to be able to have access to the current cash assistance program for immigrants, which is a SSI replacement program for the state of California, but not just for legal immigrants, but for all immigrants. And it came from that real concern. Remember talking, it's like, ya no puedo trabajar. Pero I have to, because there's no way I can keep a roof over my head or food on the table. I'm so sick, I can't get this treatment. Part of why we fought for healthcare for all. But also, if you're disabled, there's no income coming. So through those conversations and said, what are we going to do about it? And this was a way by which to respond to that. And I just see our seniors and our disabled community who has come together, and they're advocating in Sacramento, and they're doing stuff locally to bring attention to this. And I see them as powerful, and they feel powerful. And it is an uphill battle, but it's like, but they are willing to do that because they're like, we can't stay in the problem. We have to be solution oriented. So these are some of the things that we could do to advance.
Yes, that's powerful. And I think this goes hand in hand with the $1 million question, right? How do we finally achieve health equity for our communities? And I see this work in terms of strengthening the safety net to protect our communities, but also the work that you're doing to update the registry, right? You're leading in the forefront of the next immigration reform. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So in immigration law, since 1929, there is something that we call the statute of limitations, right? So it's called the registry date. And so it's created in 1929 to bring into formal recognition, legal immigration recognition, a lot of Europeans who maybe didn't come through Ellis Island the right way, as a lot of people talk about, right? But who were undocumented. And so this was created to bring them in, right? And to recognize the longevity of their residency in the United States. And so then they were able to be legalized. But then uh, time elapsed, and so more people were in that situation, again, from Europe. And so again in the 40s, in the late 40s, it was updated again, and then it had been regularly updated every time immigration law changed. It would be updated. Well, the last time that a major immigration change happened was in 1986 through the amnesty. So that was a law unto itself, and it was a moment, an amnesty, and an introduced employer sanctions. That's the law, that the major shift that happened. But taking advantage of that major shift, the registry date or the statute of limitations was updated again. So amnesty basically said that you had to have been in the country since 1982, but with the update in the registry, you could actually legalize your status if you had been in the country since 1972, which is 10 years before. Again, trying to make sure that as many people were legalized as possible by updating the registry. Well, the registry has not been updated since 1970, since 1986, when the date was changed to 1972. So what CHIRLA is trying to do is just a simple change in the registry date from 1972 to the present. And what we say is if you've been in the country for 7 years and you are not deportable and you have good moral character, uh, then you could actually legalize your status. And so, and get a green card and have access to a green card. And let's update this registry or the statute of limitations in order for our very long term immigrants to be able to legalize their status. But we introduce a rolling mechanism so we're never in the situation again where we have to now wait close to 40 years before that registry date has been updated. We hope and we will always fight for immigration reform. That is what our fight is, because immigration reform is not just legalization, but it's making our immigration system more just and humane. Family unit, fixing the law so that legal pathways are available for people. It's a broader fix, which we believe in and which we will fight for. But if you're just talking about legalizing the 11 million people, then it's if you do it through registry. It's the simplest. It's the most inclusive. So that means if you're documented, if you have TPS, it doesn't matter. It just what matters is the longevity of your time here and that you've been in the country for more than 7 years. The good news is that we have that legislation introduced. We have 79 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives, 11 co-sponsors in the Senate. Our main author is Alex Padilla in the Senate, but with him is Senator Durbin and Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders and Warren, and the list goes on. And then on the House side, our main author is Representative Zoe Lofgren, the most senior person on immigration, because we know that the terrain on the politics is very hard because of all the division and the inability of really for Congress to move forward in a way that will advance our community, right? But we have the solutions. So the solution is there, and we think that we have to bring more light to the solution and the demands of our people who have been in this country for such a long time to be able to have an opportunity to legalize. So that's what our campaign for registry is. It's called All In on Registry, and our members are behind all of this, and it really is representing um, the, the longevity of our roots in this country, but also a demand that policy that was used for the European community in the 20s and in the 40s and in the 50s and then in the 80s, like it is also available to us.
Yes, 100%. And I think many times we forget our history, right? We're all immigrants on native land. And these
Yeah.
policies that were passed to support immigrants then can be passed today. And if you think about it, right, you mentioned earlier, sometimes it's about anti-Latine sentiments or anti-indigeneity sentiments. And really being very transparent about that, right? And having the conversation that is needed to be had around the power of Latina and immigrant communities in the US. I believe the data shows that US Latinos hold 3.2 trillion of the GDP. And if we were our own country, we would be the fifth largest economy in the world. So really investing in updating the registry is an investment in our economy. It's an investment in our health, and it's just a sound decision for the country.
And I think that it's also important for us, and I agree with you 100%. And it is also important for us to also note that there's a reason why people are kept undocumented, because then you're not investing in their health and their in the safety net and the things that will allow them to be whole as human beings. And part of it is, we celebrate it in California. We're the only state that has actually opened up access to everybody, regardless of immigration status. But we're the only state that's doing that. And in Illinois, who actually advanced some of their work, now rolled some of it back. So the thing about it is that it really has healthcare consequences for our people. And it was, and then of course that's the physical health when you can't go, and if you don't have a driver's license, you can't take your children yourself to appointments, health appointments, and all sorts of other barriers. But there is a mental anguish that we need to talk about it. What does it mean to live in this country undocumented? What does it mean not to be able to visit the family that love you if you can't travel, if your parents and your loved ones are in another country? See, we don't talk enough about that part of our health and our well-being. And I see so many women who suffer so much because their mothers are in another home country and they haven't seen them, or their fathers and their parents pass away and they're not there, or that wish by their children to meet their grandparents. And I had well, I have a cousin when he was little, in order for him to have a relationship with his grandparents, the parents would actually have us take him to the airport because they were afraid to go to the airport, and things were really tough, right? To go drop him off so that they would go and he could go visit his grandparents. But think about that. Think about what most families do. It's sort of this idea of like intergenerational care. And so you're disrupting a lot of things. And it really is, we are people with indigenous roots. And these are things that intergeneration, the care and the love of the elders, and to be separated from that, or for children to feel that they're going to be separated from their parents or live in that fear. And then worse, if they actually experience that fear becomes reality when their parents are picked up and deported. All of that is so impactful on our health. And we're mixed status families. So a lot of people say, no, even that's for the lack of impact US citizens. It impacts people with green cards. It impacts us all because we're, as a community, especially Mexican community, we're so intertwined when it comes to statuses, and that is something that we need to, from a healthcare perspective, from a real care perspective, we really need to understand that this is doing great damage if we don't fix it, and what an opportunity is not to create generational trauma by updating registry, having immigration reform, making sure that our people have a pathway to citizenship. Will that resolve every issue? No, but it'll take a huge burden, a huge um, level of anxiety from our community.
Yes, beautiful. And ultimately impact all of our well-being and the health of the nation. So it's really powerful work. Wonderful. Well, with those beautiful words, thank you for the amazing and inspirational conversation today. Again, I just want to restate how much I admire you and your work and everything that you've done to fight for our comunidad. Gracias.
Thank you so much, and I just want to say, keep it up. Uh, I would say, and I love saying it after Aquila.
Ay, gracias. Te me cuidas y a tu salud.
Ay, gracias. A tu salud.